So once again, thank you everyone. Welcome to our free webinar covering all things planning today. Thank you for joining us again, or joining us for the first time in some cases on this Wednesday afternoon. I hope you're all well during what I believe is now the 6th week of lockdown, possibly 7th. Doesn't time fly when we're having fun? I look forward to the debate today and the inputs both from our team here at WYG and from those of you watching. Today, joining us back again, we have Simon Coles, Director in our Wellington team, and Ian Blacker, the Director in our Bristol team, back for more action as from last time. And I'm also really pleased to introduce to you today Simon Elliott, who joins us from our Milton Keynes office as Associate Director. He is an OAN 5-year housing land supply, socioeconomic and housing policy extraordinaire, so I'm told. We also have back today Jojo Bannister, the brains behind the technology, and here to keep us all in line today, and just myself, really just to keep things moving. As before, I have got some housekeeping to do. I'm going to try my best to keep it brief. So, as with previous sessions, we've put everyone on mute to keep background noise to a minimum. Please can you also turn off your camera just to avoid any technical issues with sound or voice. So if you've got your camera on, please could you turn it off now? Thanks very much. So as before, no PowerPoints, no fancy gimmicks. The session aims to get through as many questions and valuable discussion from yourselves as possible. This will include questions that have already been submitted through our dedicated email address. Thank you for those. And for those who aren't aware of it, it's talkingtownplanning@wyg.com. That won't be the last time I say that today, I'm sure. As always, our live chat facility is available. I would really encourage you, particularly from our experiences last time, to use this function just to get the best out of the session while the speakers are on as well. In order to use the chat function, you can get involved using the Teams Messenger service. So if you don't know how to use this, I didn't until about 3 weeks ago. If you move your mouse across the screen now, and a menu will appear right in front of you, sort of where your mute button is and various others. Click on the icon that's located third from the right. It looks like a speech bubble, and it should say show conversation when you hover over it. If you click on this, it should pull up a banner on the right-hand side of your screen with everybody's messages viewable, and you can add your own messages using the box at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If anyone can't get to this, please use our email address. That's the talkingtownplanning@wyg.com address, and Jojo will certainly try and work her magic. Feedback to be planning related, please. I don't know why I feel the need to always say this, but please keep it clean. Perhaps that's from recent experiences elsewhere. Jojo and I will do our best to field queries, and what we're going to do today is split the session into 2 themes. So we're going to start the first half with housing delivery and 5-year housing land supply, and then we'll swap over to plan making. I'm sure there'll be a little bit of overlap, but we'll broadly try and keep it in that format. So don't worry if your question is not immediately answered. It might be that it appears later again in the session. We'll try to stick fairly rigidly to our one hour slot time where possible, and we will pick up any residual queries through the chat function or the email address as we can. The reason today why the session is recorded is because we do intend to share it via LinkedIn, and we can share the recording directly with you through email as well. So as is very much usual for me, I have talked far too much. I'd like to go straight on and pass over to Simon Coles if I can. Simon, it's been 3 weeks since our last session, so what's new for you?
Well, Rebecca, what's new for me? I've learned to skip. Well, actually, I'm learning to skip, much to the amusement of my children and my neighbours. But for those who haven't tried it, let me tell you, it's a lot harder than Anthony Joshua makes it look. It is really good exercise. And I've got a new set of headphones. I no longer look like a superstar DJ or an airline pilot, just a call centre operative. But on the planning front, by and large, I think we're all pretty much adapting as a profession to the new ways of working. Technology is going well, and I think it's pretty encouraging, accepting, of course, we've had no choice but to adapt. I mean, looking at decision making, I'm sensing that most authorities have brought in new powers of delegation. Some are more extensive than others, as you'd expect. Many are now running virtual committees, and my one is in North Dorset on the 14th of May, so I'm looking forward to that one. There's also quite a lot of activity going along behind the scenes in many other authorities around the country, trialling platforms and processes and doing their dry runs of virtual committees. but still some are lagging way behind and demonstrating pretty much a lamentable lack of can-do, in my opinion, naming no names, of course. But turning to working in the new normal, I think technology has proven to be a game changer. It's supported the planning processes. It's only going to broaden and improve, to be honest. We've come a long way in a short space of time, and actually, I think we should be pretty proud of that. We're now planning for a return to work, whatever that may look like. Staggered hours and working from home, a combination have been talked about. But for me, the important thing in all that is the word work. We need to get back to full working capacity in short order if we're going to stand any chance of minimising impacts on the wider economy. And really, I think everything that I want to say today is all about getting that drive and that can-do and taking a few risks and getting us back on track. I mean, time will tell, but as a profession, I think we've done okay in our new virtual life. But as I've said before, Rebecca, planning is a people business, and we should not forget that.
Simon, you're being untypically modest. 3 weeks ago, you berated Pins for a complete lack of action, and lo and behold, just about to launch into some first virtual hearings. So you speak and Pins listen.
Well, it's not. I wish it was all so easy as that, Ian. And as we may get onto the subject of Pins later, and I think I've got some further views to share with you all on that.
Yeah, and I did. I think it was the RTPI chief exec that said that 96% of the planning profession are working from home or not in the office, which is quite a staggering amount. And I'm truly excited, as I'm sure you'll all know, that at least 2 of the brand new virtual committees will be occurring on my birthday. Hooray! So I will look forward to that immensely on the 14th of May for anyone who's interested. So moving straight back on to the planning world, Jojo, have you got our first question for us today?
Yeah, we've had quite a few questions emailed in on the subject of housing delivery and how developers can demonstrate to councils that their site is in fact deliverable.
Well, that sounds like a question that's very firmly up Simon Elliott's street. So Simon, take it away.
He's not there, is he?
We seem to have lost Simon Elliott for the time being, so I am going to move on to not our second choice, Simon. I wouldn't say that. Simon Coles, any thoughts on the question from Jojo?
Well, I think really the whole issue of housing delivery will only become a little bit clearer, and I think we're talking about 5-year supply as well. Really, as we emerge a little further from the pandemic, and probably in the next 5 to 6 months. We talked last time about the Welbeck decision, and the inspector's idea there of a 3 to 6 month delay might be a bit about right. We know that building sites are starting to return, but they will not be returning at anywhere near full capacity. There are going to be some very interesting working arrangements, and I suspect really they will be focusing on completing dwellings where they've had pre-orders in order to get some cash in the bank. That may not be the case across the whole industry. But I think really the effects on a 5-year supply of things like the delays in plan making, things like the delays in issuing appeals and planning decisions. We've heard various commentators. I think Barton Wilmore mentioned a 94,000 reduction in delivery. These are pretty significant numbers. And there will be authorities up and down the land, no doubt, looking over their shoulders at what the industry might be doing in response to that, Rebecca.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we have Simon Elliott back. Excellent.
Fantastic. I should not mute myself in future because that seemed to be the problem.
Well, excellent. Well, at least we haven't scared you off entirely. So that was my fear. So yeah, I don't know, Jojo, did you want to repeat the question for Simon? Because I would value his thoughts on this actually.
Yeah, much more so than mine. My pathetic attempt at answering it on the spot.
Yeah, just on the subject of housing delivery and how developers can demonstrate to councils that their scheme is in fact deliverable.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, it's always going to be the case of you need to have a good site. It needs to have those sustainability credentials, and it needs to tick the boxes in terms of minimising harm. That was the same before coronavirus, and it's going to be the same throughout. But it's what you can do to put that little bit of extra icing on the cake and get it through. And I think particularly now, where local authorities are so concerned about where their next housing supply is going to come from, perhaps looking at some sort of delivery statement, exploring how your company, how your business has delivered in the past, what your build rates are, how you're looking in particular on this site of phasing things, what issues are involved, that kind of thing. I think really sort of answering the questions that the councils have, and quite often we try and avoid because they're difficult. Actually putting some meat on the bones of those things will help. I don't know what others think about that.
Yeah, Ian, did you want to weigh in here at all?
Yeah, I think we 3 weeks ago, again, a bit like Simon Coles was saying. 3 weeks ago, we were talking a lot about collaboration and helping and helping councils, and also ensuring that we provide the fullest details to support our case and support our client's case. And I think both those things are even more true now. And as Simon has just touched upon, this sort of an experience table, a statement of fact, a statement of deliverability of your site is going to become ever more important, because the statistics, the evidence that existed before, frankly, isn't going to exist now. If we're to believe that completion rates are going to be down by a third, we were only starting to approach our annual completions targets. So that's gone. It's going to take a long time. The Department Wilmore report that Simon mentioned, was talking 27, 28 in order to get back to some sort of comparable rates. So I think it is going to be about demonstrating, getting your evidence in and demonstrating, but also being aware that maybe from now on, everyone's not going to be playing quite so nicely. Now, whether that's a competing site or whether that's somebody trying to stop all sites coming forward, or your site particularly. So I think it's going to become ever more important to have that evidence and be prepared to go into a lot of detail to make a very robust case to defend potentially to ensure that your site comes higher up the pecking order than the competing sites.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
There's a lot to think about. Jojo, any further questions on housing delivery at all?
Yeah, I think we've probably just covered a bit on this, but whether we feel that how COVID-19 will impact on housing delivery and 5-year housing land supplies so far.
Another one for me.
Yeah, can be, Simon. I mean, I suppose I've sort of put a bit about it on the chat, but I think there are both negatives and positives, aren't there? We're certainly working with a lot of our clients to obviously identify what's going on with their sites that are already going through the planning system or about to, but also just reviewing opportunities that perhaps have been put on the back burner because they weren't allocated, or because they've perhaps just been put on the too difficult pile, and actually seeing if the timing is right now, because circumstances have changed so much. Sometimes the answer is still no. In some of my cases, the answer has been yes. But I think there are both positives and negatives to be taken away from the current ever changing situation. I think that's got to be highlighted as well. Simon Elliott, go for it.
Okay. I think in the short term, we've seen from the Wokingham decision for Welbeck Land, the inspector gave some thought to the possibility of knocking a bit off the supply to reflect COVID-19 situation, and we may see some of that over the next few months, but it's probably going to be on a case-to-case basis. It is quite difficult to actually give a clear steer on that as yet. I think what the bigger problem, though, going forward is what we do in the longer term. As both Ian and Simon have said, its supply is expected to be further down, and it's impractical to have the expectation that an awful lot of these authorities are going to continue to achieve their 5-year hazard and supply when the market simply cannot sustain those numbers. So there is going to be this question as to whether we draw back on the buffers or whether we put in some sort of mitigation in there, so that we just don't have a free-for-all through the 5-year hazard and supply system. How that's actually going to work in practice, really don't know. That's certainly not something for inspectors to deal with. That's going to be a ministerial issue. But if you can imagine that the Tory heartlands are certainly not going to want this free-for-all, which could open up if the market's not there to actually, if people haven't got the money for the mortgages to buy the housing, the house builders aren't going to build. So it's giving that confidence to the market that the plan system is still going to work, and we can't just throw it in any application anywhere.
And I suppose the question mark on that is how long that will take. I mean, thankfully, local authorities do seem to be moving faster than the likes of PINS at the moment, because if they weren't, then I think that'd probably be the exact situation that we'd be in. It would be a free-for-all with absolutely, which in some ways is great, but as you say, it's not when you haven't got any confidence in it and you just don't know the answer that you're going to get, and obviously you're taking the risk of and the finance associated with a planning application or any works at all. Ian, any thoughts on this one in particular? What have been your experiences sort of in the last few weeks?
A whole load of uncertainty, as Simon says, as I suspect we're all experiencing. And when there's not clarity, there's opportunity, but there's also greater risk. We've been waiting however many weeks for a simple statement or simple action from the government on extending time limits of permissions that are about to expire. We've been, obviously the white paper's been pushed back. There's been talk of reviews of everything from standard methodologies to reviews of zonal planning, all sorts of ideas. We're waiting, and I appreciate that Jenric's got other things on his plate at the moment and other things to deal with. But there's these things in their own context. We cannot wait too long, because the longer it takes to provide this clarity, as Simon Elliott says, if it's down to individual inspectors, then there's going to be more challenges. And we've seen some of the higher profile appeal decisions. There's already talk of them going up the line. We've seen some court cases with judgments coming down, and again, there's been opportunities there for those to be challenged until they get to the final the final court. So I do think it shouldn't be a free-for-all, but I suspect for the short term, it's going to be a free-for-all with people making up their own rules as they go along. So everyone needs to be backing themselves as fully as they can and making the strongest case.
Yeah, and actually now is quite a good time to bring in Annabelle's question on the chat function, linking to just what you've been talking about actually, and I think we did cover a little bit on planning permissions due to be lapsed. Jojo, do you want to read out that question for everyone's benefit in case not everyone has a chat?
Yep, Annabelle's just asking whether COVID-19 on new sites, the effects essentially of lapsing planning permissions and obviously permissions therefore not being implemented in time, and what kind of effect that will have.
Simon Coles, I think you did say something on this in our last SEMPS webinar that we did.
Yeah, I did. Very briefly, though. I think just picking up on the issue of lapse consents, it's another issue that will go into the melting pot in terms of arguments about delivery. Now, clearly, it is not good news if you are a developer and through no fault of your own, you have a lapse permission on your plate. Because that will delay, it will cost, and it will risk. So none of this is great news. But I think really we need to be just slightly cautious. Some authorities are taking great strides actually in just making life a little bit easier to get approval, discharge conditions, and so on and so forth. I heard a great case in Cornwall the other day of a developer who had this exact situation, and the officer went out of their way, in fact, to approve the details and discharge a couple of other pre-commencement conditions that will enable that developer, I think, on the 10th of May to start work and implement that permission. Really, I think what it comes down to this, we're not going to get anything anytime soon from the government, and there's no point in pretending that we are. But it is down really, I think, to the applicant and its agent to try and prise open that authority, speak to the people that they need to speak to try and just move the situation on a little bit. You know, the more I'm hearing from authorities, the better they have got up to speed in home working, etc. And the more ways that they're finding round things like site visits and notices and consultations and so on and so forth. So I think the key is going to be in being absolutely proactive and not just relying on the process to take shape.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose one of the positives, I think, again, we touched on last time, is that, you know, if they're not carrying out site visits and they're not in meetings, it might be that your officer actually is at their desk able to write a report, which is fantastic, isn't it? So if they, you know, there is, as I said, the definite positives to be taken away with this one. Jojo, I think we have time for one more housing delivery question before we flip over to plan making. Have we got any more in the email inbox at all?
Yeah, we've had one emailed in that's asking how strongly can LPAs defend their existing 5-year housing land supply, and do we think there will be a generic figure or percentage by which LPAs will have to reduce their supply as a result of COVID-19?
Well, that is a good one, actually. And I mean, this is the trouble, Simon Elliott. You know, if you're a 5-year housing land supply and we've got that on the first half of the agenda, then you will be very popular. So I will put that one straight back to you as well, if that's all right with you.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I would like to see some sort of ministerial statement which says if you got a 5% buffer, you do 1% off or something like that. Perhaps it's linked to housing delivery test or something. As Simon Cole's just said, we're not going to get anything particularly quickly from the government. I think we will look to see something like that in the future, but for the next 6 months or so, we're effectively on our own, and we need to muddle through. I think there's going to be a degree of just trying to understand what was the impacts in April when sites completely stopped, and then what's the impact going forward over the next few months when things might be a bit slower, either because of the market situation or because of health and safety, social distancing issues on site. I think it's got to be led by the evidence, really, and that's going to be the complication, because there's going to be very little evidence to start off with. Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think we're going to see an awful lot of more discussion about this at individual appeals, and hopefully a few of those will have some real nuggets in which we can actually take away and use in others. Certainly, I've got one I'm writing at the moment, and it's spending more time on trying to work out what the COVID situation is than anything else.
Yeah, and it's actually, this is quite a nice final question on housing delivery, because of course it does sort of tie in with plan making, in that if that's stalled, and we'll no doubt come on to that in a minute, there isn't potentially going to be a 5-year housing land supply, and does that offer opportunities up in different forms, notwithstanding uncertainty, which was never a great thing for anyone. Simon Coles, did you want to weigh in on that at all?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Look, there are loads of people out there who are jumping up and down, telling their clients to get applications in, exploit 5-year housing land supply arguments, and so on and so forth. I'm not in that camp, I'm afraid. Yes, there might be, in some cases, opportunities for quick fire applications. Simon Elliott referred to getting the right site, getting your technical ducks in a row, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you've got to be very careful about your timing with these. The last thing you want is to get your application in, and there to be a long delay in determining that application. Maybe the authority's not doing site visits. Maybe it hasn't got its act together doing virtual planning committees yet. And then it gets refused, or you appeal after 13 weeks. And where do you go there? You've got PINS, which is only really just showing signs of getting to grips with the pandemic and what it means for its processes. And so you could well find yourself in a situation whereby your application gets put in on the sidelines, and the local plan catches up, or a neighbourhood plan catches up. And all of a sudden, you've lost your element of surprise, as it were. So I think you've just got to be slightly careful about jumping to a quick application when there might well be better ways of delivering the outcomes that your clients want.
Yeah, definitely food for thought. What I am seeing actually is for some councils, and I will use an example here just to give a bit of context. So, the previous Taunton Deane and West Somerset authorities merged and lost, I think, all but 1 or 2 of their officers. So there was a time when we weren't recommending pre-app, mainly just because there wasn't an officer to do it, or if there was an officer to do it, they were leaving in 2 weeks, and it wasn't, you couldn't necessarily justify the process, which is not our normal approach. But I am finding now, off the back of obviously that all sort of bedding in, but also off the back of existing events, pre-app is something on the smaller schemes. Obviously on the larger schemes, it's just something that you do, you can't not do, for your own certainty, as we've already talked about. But on some of the smaller schemes, we are more proactive in that now, I think, just because at least that does offer up a potential route of some certainty ahead of submitting the application, particularly if you're sort of making assumptions where you haven't got ministerial statements to back you up, and you're saying, well, this seems to be a sensible, logical approach. Hey, local authority, do you agree with me? So that's one route that we're going down on the smaller sites, where perhaps pre-app would have been questionable, particularly where a local authority stance, either through policy or appeal or both, is fairly clear. So moving on now to the plan making sort of elements, and picking up any questions on the chat. Jojo, I don't think we have any plan making ones actually on the chat, but are there any emailed ones at all?
Yep, we've had quite a broad question come in asking how COVID-19 will affect local plan preparation.
Ian, I'm going to go to you for that one, I think.
Nice and broad, in lots and lots of ways. And I think a bit like Simon Coles was saying there about, a planning consultant, of course, would say, get your planning strategy right. But trying to tie all these bits and pieces together, there is going to be some confusion. There is going to be delay, clearly. And so it's trying to think about what does that delay actually mean? We shouldn't, again, instantly think that simply because a plan's out of date or the 5-year housing land supply isn't demonstrable, that gives a carte blanche for new development absolutely anywhere. The advice and the advice from court cases is very clear about the primacy of the development plan. The advice is very clear about weight and material considerations. So I think it's about, as Simon was saying, about placing your scheme, your site in the right context now and as that plan progresses. There will be, I think, as you said earlier on, Rebecca, there will be benefits and there'll be some winners and there'll be some losers. If your site is well placed in terms of sustainability, then that can put you in a strong position. It should have always put you in a strong position. It might put you in a stronger position now if some sites are falling away, if some other developers or some other sites can't demonstrate deliverability. What's happening to councils' infrastructure delivery plans? No one's got any money. Everyone's going to be all councils are reporting tens of £millions of deficits. What's happening there? Added into, there's probably going to be less money coming in through SIL and Section 106 payments. So you might have been relying you might have been relying upon some infrastructure or some advanced works in order to improve the prospects of your site. How does that affect you? Alternatively, that might be knocking out some other sites. That might be leaving a hole in the allocations or in the ability to meet targets that your site could fill. So your site might be going further up the pecking order. What can you do to help that position? So again, a bit like Simon was saying about let's not rush, let's anticipate. I think what are the implications? The thing we need to be thinking about what are the implications of delay to the plan process, because I think that's almost a given. There is going to be delay. What does that mean relatively for your sites, and what can then you do to get yourself and your site in the best position when the process restarts?
Yeah, and actually, we're doing a lot of that, and I suspect you're doing similar things in the Bristol office. We're not only looking at specific sites, but for some of our clients, we're looking more holistically. So we're saying, right, this is an area where the local plan is stalled, which in some cases may be COVID related or just would have happened anyway. Particularly in the areas, I won't name them, where they're relying on much more strategic development with those infrastructure delivery issues. And saying, right, what's going on there in that area in terms of the local plan and in terms of 5-year supply? Can we run through some of their trajectories and have a look at how realistic they actually are? And that really comes right at the start of the process when our clients may be looking into land interests, not a particular site, specifically. So that says you can look at it on both a site as a site analysis exercise, but you can also look at it as just looking at a local authority area or a group of local authority areas, and particularly where you may have joint local plans, ongoing or whatever, and seeing if you can approach it that way in a more sort of, almost before the sort of site search activity, stuff goes on. Simon,
sorry, Rebecca, I agree. There's new starts, and I think there might be, with delays, I think there's going to be pressure on a whole series of authorities to possibly start that process again, because they know they're going to be, there's a very great likelihood they're going to be challenged down the line to demonstrate. So they're going to start. I mean, Baines has just launched it this week, a new call for sites. So it wouldn't surprise me to see more authorities doing that. And again, depending on where your site is, depending on how you're fixed, that could be to your benefit. There could be a site that you thought it's not this time round, or it's in a later phase. Can it be brought forward? Or you might be one of the sites that's affected because of the lack of infrastructure, or other sites are competing. So it really is using the time of the delay to actually go back, reinterrogate, and understand what your options are.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Any others on specifically sort of plan making, Jojo?
Yep, we've got one relating to neighbourhood plans and what impact will there be with a decision to postpone referendums on neighbourhood plans?
Well, if the audience today is anything like the one we had for our Sandy Park real, not virtual event back last year, there may be an audible groan that we can't hear through our mute buttons. For me personally, I deal with a lot of rural exception sites, and I do find that neighbourhood plans are quite invaluable just to get a bit of a steer of where the parish or town council is at. So it will be interesting with those sort of on the back burner as to what impacts that has. Ian, I'm going to go straight back to you actually, because we've had recent discussions on this and I'd appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, a similar story, I think, really. If we're saying, well, it's been said that there's going to be no referendum until May next year. With the facts are quite simple. Our favourite paras from the framework about the weight to be attached to plans. The statement from government said that those plans, neighbourhood plans that would have gone to referendum very shortly, would still carry significant weight. So I think that the facts there are relatively clear. There's always fun about significant weight and balance. But again, I think the other, possibly the as interesting or more interesting part of it is what happens if those plans become out of sync with the local plan. Clearly, the housing allocations within a neighbourhood plan have to be in sync with the local plan. Now, again, what happens if in the intervening at least year period they become out of sync? Either the local plan progresses or the local plan progresses in a slightly different way. Will those communities preparing those neighbourhood plans, even if they've reached the stage of being on the point of going to referendum, will they feel that they should in order to avoid difficulties down the line, or should they be compelled to revisit those and actually not quite start the whole process again, but like through the local plan process, maybe go back and sense check how they were approaching those? Because I think if they don't, and there does become any mismatch over the next year between what they were proposing now and the world we're going to be in a year's time, I think they could certainly reduce the effectiveness of those neighbourhood plans and open themselves up to all sorts of challenge.
And I suppose slightly off track, but one of the issues as well is just generally, if you say you're involved in an area where a neighbourhood plan is being prepared, or indeed has been made actually, how to engage with those parish councils at the moment, because obviously face-to-face is not an option. I know internally at WIG we're looking at virtual options, both for that and obviously for public consultation as well. I think there are opportunities to be able to provide something at least as good as face-to-face, if not better, which is probably actually what you require just to be able to kind of balance that and make it feel like it's a worthwhile exercise for everybody involved. But yeah, there's sort of significant challenges really around neighbourhood plans, and I suppose it just adds in a way to the uncertainty overall. Jojo, any more questions to throw at our panel?
Yep. What changes could be made to the calculation of need to help achieve the government's target of 300,000 new homes annually, especially in the new normal, so post-COVID-19?
I heard standard methodology and I immediately looked at Simon Elliott. So let's go over there.
Okay, great. My favourite subject. Okay, the government has really tied themselves in knots with local housing need versus objectively assessed needs. The whole experience of setting out a minimum target for every local authority has been an absolute failure. A lot of the problem is that they threw out this much vaunted 300,000 without actually defining where it came from, what it actually includes. In simple terms, does it include gypsies and travellers, for example? Does it include older persons accommodation, that kind of thing? There's no clarity to any of it at all. So I think for starters, we really do need to go back to basics and understand what that 300,000 is, and whether it continues to be the right number. After all, it was cooked up in the period when we had the 2014 based household projections, and we're now looking, well, we should have the 2018 based household projections in the next few weeks, fingers crossed. So things have moved on significantly. In terms of how we actually do the calculation, a number of commentators have suggested that we move away from those household projections completely and look purely at market indicators. I'm a little bit of a different view, I think, to that. All those market indicators have flaws within them, largely because of the sample sizes, because of lag times in how the data is collected and things. Instead, I'm more of the mind that we put on simple multipliers onto population, and we just say, okay, we know where the youngest populations are, let's put the house in there, and that will redirect it into those areas whereby we have households which are struggling to form because of lack of finance to achieve their mortgage, or to put down payment on a private rent, or are being excluded from affordable housing. So, for example, I did some studies last year for the Homes England on this, and we found that what it did is it took a huge amount of the need out of the greenbelt authorities and put it back in those metropolitan areas. So we saw that it moved back into Leeds, which have deleted so many new settlements from their local plan, and into Birmingham, into Manchester, even Southampton and places like that saw significant changes in housing need and reductions in the greenbelt authorities. Now, those greenbelt authorities were never going to deliver those houses anyway, so it's not a case of losing housing need and losing market share. It's just redistributing it to a more sensible pattern amongst local authorities. So there is an awful lot to be done. I know we'll have something in the white paper, in fact, about it, but I think there's going to be quite a few arguments to come as to whether we stick with LHN as a method, or whether we go straight back into an OAN situation. Hopefully that answers it.
Rebecca, messing with your very carefully structured and crafted themes. Just jumping back on that, I think it was interesting with the recent South Oxfordshire Greenbelt appeal decision by Jenrick, and that not just his beef with them and them with him, that in that one, even though they couldn't show a 5-year supply, the decision was predicated not on the tilted balance, but on an acute affordable housing need, demonstrating very special circumstances. So it was interesting that you've got the technical argument over there, but actually an appeal decision using a much looser, whether it's considered a higher or a lower barrier hurdle to jump, but that was used. Well, we could go down that argument, but we're not going to. Actually, we're going to argue that acute affordable housing need is a very special circumstance. Now, as ever in a green belt, or as typical in a green belt, that wasn't the only reason, that wasn't the only very special circumstance that was demonstrated. But again, I think this whole it sort of blurs across, and it's not the technical stuff is clear and clearly important, and we need to find some suitable, understandable, replicable, scalable way of dealing with that. But it can also be used in other ways. It can be used in a more generic way of throwing things in to either get what you want to achieve or muddy the waters.
Absolutely, and with affordable housing, one of the things which we're seeing quite a lot of is in those greenbelt authorities where housing need is driven by values. An awful lot of affordable housing is being the right to buy is coming in, and people they're gaining financially out of that. So affordable housing as a stock is going down rather than up. I know of one local authority which is virtually all in the green belt, where the average over the last 15 years, by the time you take into account losses of social housing stock, is something like 50 units a year, in comparison to a 300 unit requirement. So there's an awful lot of arguments to be had.
The careful structure in terms of putting together our email questions in a set order is entirely Jojo's, and I think she's holding it together really well with your escapades there, Ian. Let's push that button even further. I want to completely divert off the agenda. I know that we did have an email question, because I was particularly interested in it myself, on the forthcoming government white paper. And the measures that would be that could be forthcoming once we ever, make it out of COVID, or perhaps it'll happen at the same time, just to really keep us on our toes. So, for entirely selfish reasons, but also I think because we've got 10 minutes left, and let's keep it positive. What do we think the priorities in the white paper, because the range of measures will be, and how that'll impact on both ourselves and our clients and our sites. Simon Coles, I know you have a particular interest in this.
Not a particular interest, to be honest with you, Rebecca, although it is going to be interesting to see, when it's published. We've been waiting for it for some time now, but really how much the pandemic will have changed the innuendo and the nuances of it. The contents are actually the worst kept secret in history, really. There's going to be stuff on local authority funding, performance related planning fees, fee rebates where appeals are allowed, zonal planning, Ian mentioned earlier, new technology, CPOs, encouraging developers to build out permissions more quickly. I think that's pretty much it. A bit of architecture and design and so on and so forth. But really, I think it is going to offer, as usual, a little bit of carrot, a little bit of stick, and really how much effect will it have? Well, the jury's out because we haven't seen it yet. But I think the government has to take a risk. I think it has to be bold. And I think it has to make some considerable funding efforts to ensure much better quality and much quicker decision making at the local level. I think the Bridget Rosewell CBE report on planning appeals has been great for inquiries. It's really speeded that process up when they finally get back to doing them, of course. But there's nothing on hearings, nothing on written reps. We really need to see those two processes speeded up. So there's a whole lot of speeding up of the process. It's entered into something of a malaise. Simon Elliott will be well aware of all of the bun fights going on about housing need and so on and so forth, when actually really what is required is a planning white paper that is actually long on its promises. I for one welcome a reform that speeds up the planning system, but actually in my old age I've become a little bit of a cynic about planning reforms which claim to speed up the system, because actually what they do is they slow it down. And what really they do is actually they say on the one hand, yes, we're going to speed it up, here's more money, there's carrots and sticks here, and then somebody comes along and introduces biodiversity net gain. Somebody comes along and introduces climate change, carbon plans, design requirements, and so on and so forth, which actually then put the brakes on the back wheels. So, however laudable biodiversity net gain may be, the white paper has got to actually take a control of the situation and deliver some tangible change that is actually going to do what it claims it's going to do. Generic talks about radical reform, etc. Well, let's wait and see, shall we?
Yeah, I suppose there's a question mark over, are they going to go back to the drawing board in light of COVID-19? Not sure. Let's hope not. Let's hope they try and progress things, because as Simon said, I think there are a lot of positive measures to be taken out of what's come out of government in the last sort of year or so. Jojo, I think we've got time for one last question. So to put you on the spot, I'll let you pick the last one out of any remaining sort of email ones that we've got.
Yeah, we do have one on pins, and as much as I like to see Simon's reaction to that one, I'll probably ask the one about the planning guidance, which is, should we refer to the regional planning guidance system that was abandoned in 2010 for setting housing numbers at the regional and local levels?
Well, I mean, Simon Coles, you're certainly old enough to remember that system, so I will pass that one directly on to you. You can get away with this in virtual systems, you see.
Oh, thanks.
Old enough to remember the 1947 Act, so that's recent history for him.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Okay, look, I said at our annual seminar at Sandy Park last November, the home of the mighty Exeter Chiefs, that the duty to cooperate isn't working. Housing, there's big problems with the local plan system, housing need calculations and how it's done and implemented and delivered and so on and so forth. The whole thing's a bit of a mess. I can't help wondering whether it would be worth thinking about a return to the regional planning system, whereby figures were identified, a need was identified, and then distributed through the local planning authorities, which then had to meet that need through site allocations in their plans. I mean, I think that's a bit of a nostalgic view of the past, a little bit like saying the summers were hot last millennium when I was a boy. But I'm sure the industry could come up with something that takes away the pain and the angst and the bun fighting of EIPs and.
Oh, I think we've got a bit of a freeze on Simon just when he was getting into his stride as well. It's an interesting concept, isn't it? Because it doesn't work with the government sort of throwing down a very much standard methodology, and getting all of these, as Simon was saying, bun fights, within the EIPs. Would it work at a more regional level? I think it is somewhat nostalgic in that there were obviously gripes with that system in itself in terms of the length of time it took and the amount of effort it took to get an RSS put together in the first place. So there's probably pros and cons to both of those systems. Jojo, I think we can squeeze in another one just before we close off for today. What have you got for us?
I was quite hoping that Simon Coles would still be with us, but is PINS doing enough to maintain the appeals process?
Go on, Ian, I'll give you the pleasure on this one.
Oh, can I do my best Coles impression? No, is the simple answer. It's not. It seems we've seen on the chat, we've seen experiences elsewhere. Some councils, some authorities are performing well, some are lagging behind inevitably. I think as a government department, as for many, the last resort, it needs. For many applicants, it needs to be doing better. It needs to be doing more and quickly and better. And some of the timescales that it's set out for road testing and having a fully robust system in place of 6 months and beyond, 2021, I don't think it's good enough. Hopefully, last time Simon had his round, and there was a near immediate change. Hopefully, if the trolls that have just got for Simon are still listening, and they will react and say, yeah, we are going to speed up those changes. We are going to put our foot on the pedal because the industry needs it. Again, as we touched on earlier, if there's no real effective opportunity to appeal and have a decision in a timely fashion, that does allow the delays and underperformance earlier in the system. So we need that out. Developers need that out and need to know that an appropriate system, a proportionate response can happen in a timely fashion. They need to do more, and they need to do it more quickly. Hopefully that's a decent Coles impression.
Almost as far as him. And I suppose the answer is just try not to get there, as we always do, and try and work with local authorities, which does seem to be the easier option, I would say, in most. I know not everybody's having the same experiences. And of course, I did promise to, or suggest at least, that we would leave this this webinar on a positive note. So, but we went to pins, so we haven't done that, I'm afraid. But thank you everybody for coming, either again today or if it was your first time. I hope you enjoyed the webinar today. Talking Town Planning at wyg.com. Please send any questions that you want there, either for future webinars, or we'll just try and get back to you as a team generally, because I think we're all trying to help everybody out in this current climate. If you want a copy of the recording of this webinar, it will be on LinkedIn, but do again make a request via talkingtownplanning@wyg.com. Suggest some other topics that you might want us to cover. At the moment, we're doing our webinars 3 to 4 weekly. Again, any comments on this is very much welcomed. So thank you very much for coming today. As always, our doors are always open at WYG, and hopefully this session was useful for you today, and I look forward to seeing you again on future webinars. Thanks very much, and thanks very much to our panel today and to Jojo.
Thanks very much all.
Thank you.